Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're cracking open the file on one of the most infamous cold cases in American history, the Zodiac Killer. But we're going to do things a little differently this time. We're stepping totally away from the sensational rumors and those Hollywood myths you've probably heard a million times. Instead, we're setting up a strictly objective forensic evidence board. We're going to systematically break down the tangible facts, the physical crime scenes, the archival documents, and those famous ciphers to see exactly what this killer actually left behind.
Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to look at the confirmed attacks, dig into the archival documents, crack the ciphers, evaluate the prime suspects, and wrap it all up with modern forensics.
Starting off with Part 1, the confirmed attacks. Let's look at the physical realities.
To truly understand this case, we absolutely have to ground ourselves in the confirmed physical realities of the crime scenes. So, law enforcement officially links the Zodiac to 4 distinct attacks over a 10-month period. That resulted in 5 deaths and 2 survivors. And I want you to really notice the geographic and tactical escalation here. It's wild. The first 2 attacks, in December 1968 and July 1969, were nighttime shootings. He targeted young couples in parked cars in the secluded rural areas of Vallejo. But then, fast forward to September 1969, and the killer strikes in broad daylight at Lake Berryessa, literally wearing an executioner's hood and using a knife instead of a gun. Finally, just a month later in October at 69, he shifts tactics completely. He shoots a lone cab driver, Paul Stein, right in the middle of Presidio Heights, a densely populated, wealthy San Francisco neighborhood.
And this brilliantly illustrates what investigators actually had to work with at those crime scenes. To be honest, the physical evidence was incredibly scarce, but the killer did leave behind a few absolutely crucial forensic traces. We've got ballistic evidence, specifically 9mm and .22 caliber shell casings. We have a literal physical signature, a cross-circle symbol, and some dates drawn in black marker right on victim Brian Hartnell's car door. There's a wet palm print lifted off a Napa payphone, and 2 partial fingerprints found wiped in blood on Paul Stein's cab. And, well, most grisly of all, the killer actually took pieces of Paul Stein's blood-stained shirt away from the scene with him.
But it wasn't just physical traces. The killer actually left behind an auditory footprint too. Right after the attacks at Blue Rock Springs and Lake Berryessa, this guy brazenly called the authorities from public payphones. I mean, he was incredibly direct with the Napa Police Department dispatch. Officer David Slate, who took the Berryessa call, reported that the man spoke in this remarkably low, monotone voice. He wasn't just reporting the crime, he was claiming it as his own.
Moving right along to Part 2, taunts and archival documents.
That chilling need for recognition totally shifts our focus from the physical crime scenes over to the psychological evidence. Because you really have to ask, what do the killer's own words reveal about his state of mind? Well, this quote right here is literal history. In August of 1969, in a letter to the San Francisco Examiner, the killer officially coined his moniker. He opened with those infamous words, "This is the Zodiac speaking." But it was the October 1969 letter to the San Francisco Chronicle that truly showed how calculated he was. He didn't just claim to be the murderer of the cab driver Paul Stein. No, he provided grisly physical proof by sticking a blood-stained swatch of Stein's shirt right there in the envelope. He was actively verifying his own crimes to the press.
And let me tell you, those letters quickly evolved from just taking credit for past crimes to threatening future ones. The Zodiac started using straight-up psychological terror tactics. He mailed in these detailed diagrams of a so-called death machine, basically a bomb he claimed to have buried somewhere. And perhaps most horrifyingly of all, he explicitly threatened to target a school bus. He talked about shooting out the front tire and, quote, picking off the kiddies. These taunts completely changed the dynamic of the case. It escalated from a localized homicide investigation into a massive Bay Area-wide panic. We're talking armed officers literally having to ride on school buses.
Now, because the case became so notorious, police were completely flooded with hoax letters. Everybody wanted to be the Zodiac. So to separate fact from fiction, investigators had to rely heavily on forensic document examination. Enter Lloyd Cunningham. He was the Secret Service's very first forensic document examiner, and he spent years literally memorizing the killer's unique formatting. The Zodiac had these very specific repetitive quirks, like he would cross his lowercase t abnormally low on the vertical line, and he left uniquely large spaces between his lines of text. By looking for the natural, unconscious rhythm of those exact quirks, Cunningham could weed out all the copycat forgeries and zero in on the authentic Zodiac communications.
All right, let's get into Part 3, cracking the Zodiac ciphers. This is all about the mathematics of codes. But as you probably know, the handwriting was just one single layer of the Zodiac's twisted correspondence. So the crucial point is really understanding what these ciphers were designed to do in the first place. A cryptogram is simply a text written in code, and the Zodiac sent 4 of them. He used these cryptograms, most notably the 408-character cipher and the 340-character cipher, to totally manipulate the media. I mean, he demanded newspapers publish them right on their front pages, threatening to kill again if they didn't. And he repeatedly, and falsely I might add, promised that cracking these codes would finally reveal his true identity.
Well, that first cipher, the Z408, was actually solved within days back in 1969 by a local couple sitting at their kitchen table. The second major code, the Z340, was a completely different beast. Just look at this number, 50. That is the number of years the infamous 340 cipher sat totally unsolved, just gathering dust in FBI vaults and pinned up on amateur detective boards all over the world. It wasn't until December of 2020 that an international team finally managed to break it open.
And the way they solved it is just an absolute testament to modern collaborative computing. Let's be clear, this wasn't cracked by one person just staring at a piece of paper for decades. First, Australian mathematician Sam Blake used a supercomputer to generate a whopping 650,000 possible reading directions for the symbols, just massive amounts of data. Then, American software engineer David Aronchak and Belgian programmer Gerald Van Eyck ran all those configurations through a custom program called AZ Decrypt to essentially force recognizable phrases out of the nonsense. Finally, the FBI's cryptographic unit stepped in and officially verified their translated message. It was just this massive, historic victory for crowdsourced, open-source intelligence.
So what exactly did a 51-year-old secret say? Well, here is the chilling decoded text. I hope you are having lots of fun in trying to catch me. I am not afraid of the gas chamber, because it will send me to paradise all the sooner. And by the way, notice the killer's trademark misspelling of paradise with a C right there at the end. True to form, the cipher revealed a lot about the killer's warped, game-playing motivations, but surprise, surprise, it did absolutely nothing to give investigators his actual name.
Which brings us to Part 4, Evaluating the Prime Suspects. Let's talk about evaluating these hypotheses.
With the killer's name still a total mystery, we have to rely on impartial evidentiary analysis rather than just getting swept up in all these unverified online theories. To do this, researchers in the Journal of Scientific Exploration have applied something super interesting called the surprise principle of evidentiary analysis. Basically, it's an analytical framework that helps objectively weigh facts and competing hypotheses between suspects. It forces investigators to stop and ask, okay, how surprising would this evidence be if the suspect were completely innocent versus if they were actually guilty? This kind of strict, data-driven comparison is absolutely vital when looking at the primary players in the case, like the most famous suspect of all time, Arthur Lee Allen, and the man who originally reported him, Donald Lee Cheney.
Now, what's really fascinating about this slide is the sheer frustration of Arthur Lee Allen's evidence file. It's crazy. The matching circumstantial evidence is staggering. I mean, the guy owned a literal Zodiac brand watch with the exact cross-circle logo. He owned the exact same model of Royal typewriter that was used in a suspected Zodiac letter. He was even picked out of a photo lineup by surviving victim Michael Maggio. But look at the contradictory forensics. When it came down to the hard science, the DNA, the bloody fingerprints pulled from the cab, the handwriting samples, Allen completely failed to match the Zodiac. Literally none of it lined up.
And because the forensics totally cleared Allen, the suspect list has just continued to grow well into the 2020s. You've got Earl Van Best Jr., who was actually named in a book by his own biological son based on similarities in the ciphers. You have Gary Francis Post, brought forward by an independent investigative group. And recently, Paul Dare was suggested in 2022 based on some really deep circumstantial ties to Bay Area culture. Yet, despite the genuinely compelling stories surrounding every single one of these men, definitive, conclusive forensic evidence remains totally elusive for all of them.
Let's wrap things up with Part 5, Modern Forensics and Legacy.
So, how exactly are investigators applying 21st century technology to this 20th century evidence? Well, the single biggest question driving the entire case today is this: will modern DNA databases finally unmask the Zodiac? We've all seen genetic genealogy tactics recently solve some major decades-old cold cases, most famously, of course, identifying the Golden State Killer. Naturally, everybody wants to know if those exact same scientific tactics can be the silver bullet that solves this mystery once and for all.
And investigators certainly haven't stopped trying. Back in 2002, a crime lab actually developed a partial DNA profile from saliva found underneath the stamps on the Zodiac's letters. That profile, by the way, is exactly what helped clear prime suspects like Arthur Lee Allen. Then, in 2018, right on the heels of the Golden State Killer's arrest, Vallejo police attempted to use open-source ancestry databases like GDmatch to trace the Zodiac's family tree. Now, while we haven't seen a definitive match hit the news just yet, the FBI and local jurisdictions maintain this as a very active, open investigation. They are really hoping the science will finally catch up to the evidence.
I want to leave you with this final, kind of provocative thought. In his later letters, the Zodiac claimed to have killed 37 people. But law enforcement, rigidly following the strict forensic evidence that we've reviewed today, has only ever confirmed 5 deaths. So it really begs the question, is the Zodiac's true legacy one of prolific mass murder, or did he just pull off the ultimate masterful manipulation of the media and the public mind? Thank you so much for following the evidence with us on this explainer. The physical facts are all right here on the board. But the ultimate truth of the Zodiac? Well, that remains waiting to be uncovered.